Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep on a case from Poughkeepsie, New York. Kendall Francois.
Oh, this one. Yeah. It's a tough one.
It is. We've got excerpts from his Wikipedia page and this book, Body Dump. Kendall Francois, the Poughkeepsie Killer.
Body dump. That's pretty straightforward.
It is. And, we cover a lot of serial killer cases, but this one feels different.
It does, doesn't it? Like there's this whole other layer. It's not just about the crimes themselves. It's trying to figure out how someone can live this double life,
Yeah.
Like so normal on the surface, but underneath.
Right. Like how did nobody see it coming? So let's start at the beginning, his early life. I mean, on paper it seems pretty average.
Yeah. High school athlete, time in the Army.
Right.
But, and maybe this is just hindsight being 2020, but there are some things that stand out now. Like when he worked as a school aide.
Oh yeah, wasn't there something about him acting inappropriately with some of the female students?
Exactly. And back then, maybe it didn't seem like a huge deal, but now,
It's like, whoa, maybe that was a sign.
right, like a missed opportunity to intervene, maybe.
Yeah.
It's chilling to think he was in a position of authority over these young girls, and already.
Yeah. But outwardly, he just kept going. Left the Army, went to community college, bounced around some jobs, ended up back in Poughkeepsie, living with his parents and sister.
And that house, that's where it gets really, really dark.
Because that's where he hid the bodies.
I know, right? In the house with his family. The level of, I don't know, compartmentalization you'd need for that, to live a normal life with that going on just feet away.
It's almost too much. So the victims, mostly sex workers in Poughkeepsie.
Yeah. And often they had a similar look. White, petite, dark hair. It wasn't random.
And tragically, that lifestyle made it harder to track when they went missing. Many of them, nobody reported them missing right away.
And that gave him more time.
Right. It's like their very existence made them more vulnerable.
Yeah. This case really exposes how society overlooks certain groups, makes them easier targets.
So while all of this is going on, he's living this normal life, family dinners, going to work, nobody knew.
The question is, how did he pull it off for so long?
Yeah. That's what we got to figure out. And to do that, I guess we got to start with the first victim, Wendy Myers.
Right. He strangled her and then drowned her.
In the bathtub.
It's just the level of brutality.
And then he hides her body in the attic.
With his family downstairs.
Yeah. Almost like he's separating those two worlds, right?
Yeah.
Downstairs, normal Kendall. Upstairs.
The secret.
But it shows, I mean, he knows it's wrong to hide it like that. But
Yeah.
but there's no remorse, no empathy.
It's a terrifying duality.
Yeah.
And Wendy's murder was just the beginning. He kept going for 2 years, and he got bolder.
The killings, they actually become more frequent. So 2 more women in November of 96, then 2 more early in 97, and then 2 more in the summer of 98. Wow. So 6 more victims in less than 2 years. It's like the killing itself was addictive or something.
You see that a lot with serial killers. They get this sense of power, and they need more of it.
But all along, he's still living this normal life. How is that even possible?
He was cunning, very good at deception, but eventually things started to unravel. The investigation that finally caught him.
All thanks to Christine Sala. She escaped, and she led the police right to him.
Talk about brave. She fought back, and by doing that, she probably saved lives. She's the one who ended his reign of terror.
She's a hero, and that's when it all came crashing down. The police go into his house.
That attic.
Oh.
It was horrifying. The smell, the bodies.
Yeah.
Just awful.
And all this right in a regular house, a regular neighborhood.
You never know, do you? Appearances could be so deceiving.
So he's arrested. The truth is out. But that was just the start of a whole other chapter. The legal battle, the community coming to terms with this.
And trying to understand how this could happen right in their midst.
It's hard to imagine the sheer scale of it all. 8 bodies in that house.
It's a lot to process, for sure. And the investigation itself, it wasn't easy. You have to remember, many of these women, they lived on the margins of society.
So it's like their disappearances didn't get as much attention.
Right. It's a sad truth. But if someone's not reported missing right away, or if they have a lifestyle that keeps them kind of under the radar.
They're more likely to be overlooked.
Sadly, yeah. And that makes it tougher for investigators. They're dealing with fragmented timelines, witnesses who might not be the most reliable, and then you've got the societal biases that sometimes
get in the way of a proper investigation.
Yeah, it makes you think, how many cases like this, how many victims just slip through the cracks?
Because nobody's really looking for them.
It's a sobering thought. But in this case, they did manage to build a strong case against Francois. I mean, Christine Sala's testimony was crucial.
Oh, absolutely. And the physical evidence.
Right. So he's indicted on 8 counts of murder. 8
Wow.
counts.
It's hard to even say that.
And then as the trial gets going, you start to see more of who Francois really is, his mindset.
Like that quote, killing seemed easier than getting into a relationship. It's chilling. What does that even mean?
It's like a window into the mind of a serial killer. It tells you he couldn't or wouldn't form normal human connections. No empathy. To him, violence was the easy way out.
Instead of dealing with people, with relationships.
He just removed them, like they were obstacles, not human beings.
It's like he dehumanized them completely.
That's a common thread in these cases. It's how they justify it, if you don't see your victims as real people.
Then it's easier to do those horrible things.
Yeah. And to make matters worse, at first, Francois pleads not guilty.
Was he trying to play the system?
Maybe. It's a common tactic. Delay things, try to find a loophole.
Mm-hmm.
But then he changes his plea to guilty.
Really? Why the sudden change?
Probably to avoid the death penalty. By pleading guilty, he's accepting responsibility, but he's also taking execution off the table.
So a life sentence instead. Do you think that means he felt any remorse? Or was it just like a survival instinct?
It's hard to say. His actions during the trial, the confessions, they were cold. No visible remorse. It felt more like a calculated move.
To save himself.
Yeah.
It's hard to feel anything but, like, disgust for someone like that. But it does bring up the whole death penalty debate. I mean, on the one hand, he killed 8 people.
It's a tough question. On the one hand, you've got the whole eye for an eye argument. He took lives, so he should forfeit his own. But then there's the moral question. Does the state have the right to take a life, even in a case like this?
And does it actually deter crime, or is it just more violence?
Exactly. It's complicated. There are strong arguments on both sides. But in the end, Francois' guilty plea took that decision out of the court's hands.
So he got 8 consecutive life sentences, no parole.
Right. He was going to die in prison.
Yeah.
And he did in 2014, AIDS-related illness.
Still, even with him locked up, there must have been this feeling of unease in Poughkeepsie, knowing he'd been there all along.
Absolutely. It shattered their sense of safety, of normalcy. It forced them to face this dark reality that evil can be hiding anywhere.
And the families of the victims, it's just unimaginable.
The pain they went through, and knowing that many of these women, they were already marginalized, overlooked.
It makes it even more tragic.
Yeah. This case shows how these crimes affect so many people, the families, the community.
And even with the conviction, is there ever really closure?
Not always. Justice was served, but the wounds, they take a long time to heal.
And in this case, there are still unanswered questions. Michelle Eason.
Right. Francois knew her, but he denied any involvement in her disappearance. Her case is still open.
So even with him gone, the full story might never be known.
And for Michelle's family, the search for answers continues. It's a lot to carry, that uncertainty.
So we've talked about his childhood, the murders, the trial, but what about the psychology of it all? What made him do it?
That's the question, isn't it? Why do some people cross that line while others don't?
Is it something they're born with? Or is it like their experiences, their environment?
It's usually a mix of things, nature and nurture. There's no one answer, no easy explanation for why someone becomes a serial killer.
But by studying these cases.
We try to understand, look for patterns, motivations, profiles. We try to make sense of the darkness.
And hopefully prevent it from happening again.
Exactly. The more we know, the better chance we have of recognizing the warning signs, intervening early.
So Francois is gone, but his case still matters. It forces us to look at these uncomfortable truths about human nature, the good and the bad.
And it reminds us that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like an ordinary person.
Yeah, it really does make you wonder about the systems in place, you know? Like, are we doing enough to protect those who are most vulnerable?
That's a huge question that this case brings up. I mean, the fact that these women could disappear and for so long without it really raising a red flag, that's a system failure for sure.
And it's especially tragic because they were already living on the edge of society.
Right. And often that means they're less likely to be reported missing, less likely to have someone looking out for them.
It's like they were invisible.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something we need to change.
Absolutely. These women deserve better. They deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be protected, and their stories, they need to be remembered, not just as victims, but as people.
Yeah, with families, with lives, with dreams. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, the headlines, but we can't forget that these are real people who were lost.
So what can we learn from all this from Kendall Francois? I mean, beyond the obvious horror of what he did, are there lessons here that can help prevent this from happening again?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is the need to pay more attention to those who are marginalized, like sex workers. They're they're often at risk because of the stigma attached to their work, the legal issues, and we need to create a system where they feel safe, where they can get help without fear of judgment.
It's about building trust.
Yeah. And we also need to be better at recognizing the warning signs. In Francois's case, there were those incidents with the students, and maybe if someone had stepped in then.
It could have had a difference.
We don't know for sure, but it's a reminder that we can't ignore those red flags. We have to create a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up, reporting things.
And that takes everyone, right? Not just law enforcement, but schools, social services, the whole community.
Right. And we need more resources for mental health, for early intervention. A lot of these violent offenders, they have a history of trauma, of abuse, of mental illness that's gone untreated. If we can address those issues early on.
Maybe we can stop it before it starts.
Exactly. It's about creating a safety net, a system of support that catches people before they fall through the cracks.
And maybe even more important, it's about changing the way we think, creating a culture of empathy, of understanding, realizing that everyone has a story.
Yeah, even those who do terrible things. It doesn't excuse their actions, but it helps us understand the complexity of human behavior.
Well, this has been a tough one, this deep dive into Kendall Francois. It's been a journey, that's for sure. But I think it's also been a reminder of how important it is to be aware, to be compassionate, and to never stop fighting for justice.
Yeah, and to never give up hope.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you found it insightful, and we encourage you to keep thinking about this case, to share your thoughts with others, and to never stop questioning, learning, and working towards a world where these kinds of tragedies are a thing of the past.
Yeah. Let's keep the conversation going.